This is chapter 2 and my my approach to it. I have to say this did not work. I failed the chapter. However, my architecture, based on the circular architecture of chapter 1, uh, helped me get a long way. When I first started this, I had some tasks which emanated out of this central town, Baltimore. And while I was doing those, I saw that the competitor built a station in Baltimore, which really messed things up for me, and then also built connections to farms. So then I tried again. So the first thing I did was I built a warehouse within the Baltimore zone, which would automatically feed Baltimore. And instead of only connecting 3 stations as the task required, I connected 6 rural industries, 6 rural industries. The task was to connect 3. I connected 6 to try to stop the competitor building lines in my area. So I initially started just with very thin lines, only single track lines, and very few trains because I didn't have much money. But the important thing is I did not need to build any railway line across the river, and I did not need to use any of the tracks or platforms in the station that the game had given me. So food was coming right in on a separate network, and you can see the link there, which was feeding Baltimore to help it grow. The next thing I did very quickly was to build a second station in Baltimore to connect the trains to New York as required by the task. The second station does not connect to any network. It doesn't connect to the warehouse network, and it doesn't connect to my other Baltimore network. So the way it is to have separate networks going. Here's the second station. That prevented the competitor building a station in Baltimore. So I could then have free reign over what I built where and how much it cost. So that was just a single track line, Baltimore to New York with one train taking clothing. The next thing I did, according to the task, was connect Washington to the south and Pittsburgh to the west with one track. But I did it in a way to let me expand later to 4 tracks. So I built the connection using the tightest curve on the inside here, keeping well away from the river to leave room to build 3 more tracks to make a 4-track circle. So all of these networks, then I had 3 disconnected networks. I then needed to get cloth from Pittsburgh to Baltimore, and that's where I failed. Even though I had all this network and trains, I didn't control the trains properly. That's another story I'm still learning. But initially I had only 1 track, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Washington, but I grew it when I could into a squashed circle. Normally I would make a circle, Washington, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, anti-clockwise around, but these high mountains prevent me from cheaply laying track. So I made a squashed circle. And that means, so if we look at this end, in the end, Washington, it's got 4 tracks coming in. 2 passenger on the left in the west, staying on the right-hand side, and 2 freight on the right to the east. They all stay on the right-hand side. So for example, the freight tracks come in on the right-hand side, split into 2, so we can use 2 platforms so that I can get twice as much going through because the train stopped at the station slow down throughput, so I alternate them or balance them half and half. The freight continues through, it never reverses, it just continues through, flowing around here, merging again to freight out on the right. Passengers similarly coming in on the right, I don't cross track, so the passengers coming in come out to the west, split into 2 tracks. They use the 2 passenger platforms, both in the same direction, northwards, coming out of the station, merging again, and continuing passenger tracks northwards on the right-hand side. Similarly, over at Pittsburgh, this is the end of my squashed circle. So let's zoom in. Again, the freight tracks are on the north side, on the right-hand side coming in, over the bridge, splitting into 2. There are the freight trains going, and the freight trains use the 2 outermost platforms there, offloading, onloading, continuing on those two tracks, which then merge again onto the right-hand freight track, going back to the remainder of the circle. Similarly, here's a passenger train coming in, empty, comes in on the right-hand side. Passenger trains split into two beneath the bridge using the platforms 1 and 2 closest to me here. Stop, load, and so on. Come around on two tracks. Here's another passenger train. I've got more than I need, obviously. These are all running empty. Then they merge, come back on the right-hand side to go out. So that's how the 4-track circle is squashed in. And of course, in the middle, I've built a bypass. Here's a passenger bypass. So the trains initially could go anti-clockwise, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, bypass, Washington, Baltimore, all flowing through without reversing directions. Then I built a freight bypass, which is on the right-hand side going near the warehouse along there. Similarly, anti-clockwise and clockwise trains serve every city directly. So I have them running in both directions, passenger and freight, both clockwise and anti-clockwise, both providing 6 direct connections from every city to every other city. Then I connected the warehouse. So then I added freight trains, which would go clockwise, warehouse to Washington, to Baltimore, to Pittsburgh, back to the warehouse to reload to get food going to the other 2 cities on the circle. Also anti-clockwise, warehouse, Pittsburgh, Baltimore City main station, Washington, back to the warehouse without using any bypasses. Then I had other tasks. They asked me to connect Pittsburgh to some town out here. Instead of connecting this station, I built a second station to stop a competitor. So there's a single track line there, not developed yet, and I made it into a circle. So every task, I build the station and the tracks with the aim of making a circular architecture for 3 stations. Sometimes only 2 stations, sometimes maybe 4. But 3 is a good number because 2 trains will give 6 direct one-way connections, giving expresses between everything and everything else. So whenever I'm asked to make another connection, I'll try to use a second station to prevent competitor coming into that town, and then I make a circle. Here, they asked me to connect another city. I forget exactly what I was asked, but the upshot is I created, instead of just using the same station, I added a second station to Toledo. So they're only very small stations, and here's the beginning of another circle. Toledo, sharing the tracks, to Indianapolis. I think there's a town up there. So that'll become a 3rd circle. So the 3-city circular architecture has got me a long way, and the only thing that I still haven't understood is I send all these freight trains around the circles, and they were supposed to bring me cloth from Pittsburgh to Baltimore, but God knows why, they kept passing through with beer and furniture and God knows what, even though I needed cloth here. So that's where I failed.